Hey, 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 we are starting chapter 2, North America at the time of the colonists' arrival. So let's go ahead and get started and we will get through this. Never a better time than during Black History Month. Let's get started. If we're going to tell the truth about slavery in the United States, we have to go way back in time to re examine a lot of the truths we have been taught about this nation. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but it can help us find answers to questions about our collective history as Americans. You might have already been wondering about some of the ideas or events that don't logically fit with the rest of the historical puzzle we're putting together, like the discovery of America, for example. How is it possible that the Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci discovered a new world when it had already had people living in it? Years after Columbus' 1492 discovery, Vespucci realized during one of his expeditions that South and North Americas were part of Asia, as Columbus had assumed. What he discovered was that there were two separate and unique land masses. This is why the names of both continents are attributed to him. However, the long held truth that the continents explored by Vespucci had not been discovered by anyone else doesn't accurately reflect what had happened when Europeans arrived in the new lands and encountered its inhabitants. But that's how colonization works. You place yourself at the center of the narrative and act as if you have the right to conquer or own and displace and subdue any and all people who stand in the way of what you believe and to be your destiny or God inspired mission. Understanding colonization is an important step towards examining and accepting the truth about slavery and the making of the United States. The colonists stole from indigenous people they met and then tried to enslave them. As someone from Wyoming, I battle constantly from a fairly early age to reconcile the history that Wyomingites celebrate, especially during Cheyenne Frontier Days, in the history that I know to be true. Back then, and even now, especially during COVID and COVID times, and the rhetoric around what was happening during those times and their rhetoric around the funds they received and what they were trying to do for their community. Um, it's something that I still need to work on. It's something that I still am trying to embolden myself to speak out upon. And I hope that you join me and I hope that you do a better job than I do. When about 150 years after Vespucci, British colonists arrived in North America, their mission was simple: settle down, seize the bountiful riches for the crown, and secure the land. They were outnumbered by the indigenous people they encountered, and they required the assistance of the very people they would go on to subdue and all but annihilate. With food scarce after weeks, sometimes months of travel and shelter non existent, they needed the help of the native people for survival. Some of the indigenous communities the Britons encountered upon arrival were the Yamasee, Powhatan, and the Wampanoag. The first colonists and the indigenous people had mutually beneficial arrangements. Each group bartered with the other for goods they had wanted or needed. But that goodwill didn't last, and eventually the two groups became fierce rivals who, in some instances, fought to the death over lands. When it was all over, thousands of indigenous people had lost their lives in battle or through the exposure of deadly diseases such as smallpox. When the colonists brought with them, and to which the indigenous people had no immunity. Wear a mask. Bird flu is a thing. Wear a mask. Okay, I'm done. Yet once they had defeated the indigenous nations and possessed their vast lands, the colonists realized that they didn't know the first thing about farming and agriculture in this new place. They also realized that if they were going to survive and thrive in the new world they dreamed of building, they would need a help of a lot of people. So they tried to force the indigenous people into slavery. Enslaving the indigenous people proved difficult because they knew the land well. They were hard to capture, and those who were captured frequently escaped, aided by their tribal kinsmen. Some captured indigenous people did not escape, but they outright rejected life as enslaved people by refusing to do the work they were ordered to do. Even more indigenous people would suffer when Europeans introduced them to alcohol, which is a super problematic thing even to this day. So my husband is from Lander, and we have Cheyenne Frontier Days here, which is a whitewashed history of like cowboyism and all of that. And alcoholism is a big thing in our communities here. It's self-medicating through years of generational trauma. And that's what it is. We've inflicted so much generational trauma from the time that we first arrived, which was what we're talking about right now in this chapter, from the residential schools. It's even today, like listening to the rhetoric of what was going on in Lander, Wyoming during the COVID pandemic, just disgusting. Um, so yeah, not a fair narrative ever at all, ever. Let's continue. Enslaving the indigenous people proved difficult because they knew the land well and they were hard to capture, and those who were captured frequently escaped, aided by their nearby tribal clansmen. But some captured indigenous people did not escape. They outright rejected life as enslaved people by refusing to do the work they were ordered to do. Even more indigenous people would suffer when Europeans introduced them to alcohol, which is self medicating. Many white people do that. I don't know why we um, contribute it to an illness for Black folks, Indigenous folks, Mexican American folks, LGBTQ folks, when it is just a survival and self-medication way to deal with the oppression that they're facing. Am I saying that all of that is okay? No, absolutely not. There are better coping mechanisms, but are we, as white people, white passing people, doing all we can to ensure that our marginalized brothers and sisters have resources and ways to access treatment for the systemic and multi-generational coping mechanisms? No, we absolutely are not. We are definitely falling grossly short of those things, and we need to do better. When colonists attempted to enslave indigenous people failed, they moved to the indentured servitude of poor people from Europe, most of whom were white, to support their lifestyles in the Americas. Indentured servitude. While indentured servants endured harsh working conditions, poor living environments, and sometimes violent punishment, their experiences were different from those of slaves. First, many willing signed contracts agreed to work for a specified amount of time in exchange for passage from Europe to the colonies, plus room and board as their sole wages. At the end of these contracts, most were freed from their commitments. In some cases, servants were forced into indentured out of desperation, or they were forced by family members as a way to settle debts. Even though many indentured servants suffered abuse, they did have rights, unlike slaves who did not. The first indentured servants arrived shortly after the establishment of Jamestown in 1607. The settlers had a lot of land to development and needed cheap labor to help with the daunting task of making the new and uncharted land their home. To do this, they recruited poor, desperate men and women in Europe who had little to lose, transporting them to work in North America for a specified period of time. For their part, indentured servants were given room, food, and freedom dues payment at the end of their contract, which included a parcel of land on which to settle down and build a home. So they got a 40 acres and a mule before black folks got a 40 acres and a mule. Indentured servants worked hard under oppressive conditions. They were punished harshly for infractions such as trying to run away. Female indentured servants were punished if they became pregnant because they would be incapable of carrying out the terms of their work of their contracts if they had to care for a child. They could be flogged or jailed for crimes or anything deemed bad behavior. But even though there were a lot of poor white people, who were desperate enough to sign into indentured servitude, there weren't enough of them for settlers. And that's when the colonists turned to buying and enslaving African people. Before slavery, the colonists did some of the same work they would force enslaved people to do. So we're going to go a little bit extra today. I'm trying to do literacy in small bites, like Gwendolyn. I forget what her handle is, but her video spoke volumes to me. You can probably find it in the repost. So we're going to go a little bit extra today, and we are going to try and keep literacy in small bites. Many white people themselves did the work that enslaved Americans were later brought in to do. During the period between the establishment of Jamestown in 1607 and the arrival of the first enslaved Africans 12 years later, white men and women, sometimes with the assistance of their indentured servants, did their own farming in the northern, southern, and middle colonies. It was back-breaking work, and they eventually turned to slave labor to build their homes and communities in the New World. And over time, their use of slave labor not only helped to build the American colonies, but also helped many colonists amass personal wealth. So not need, greed, not need, gave birth to chattel slavery in America. And we are at 15 and 20 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and put a pause in it for today. Thank you for going along this journey with me and reading with me. I will see you next time, and we will read some more. I love you very much. Take care of yourself. Some of these topics that I'm doing for the adult read with me's are very, 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 very helpful, or heavy and helpful. Heavy and helpful. It's good to know, but that doesn't mean it's any less heavy and it's any less uncomfortable. So take care of yourself, especially in these times. I love you very much, and I will see you next time. Bye.